I'm sure I'll see you next week.
Why did it say the broadcast has ended?
They said he's on the road, so, if he joins, he's not going to be here.
We should call it.
What give that away?
But that
live?
sticks up.
Yes.
It starts in less than a minute.
What's that?
Sure.
It says here that the broadcast has ended.
I think we should pay attention to that. Does it always do that?
I don't know.
Maybe that's from the last one.
No.
You got an order. You voted on that.
You see it on your screen?
Chris was on vacation. So
It says it'll start in less than a minute.
Oh, there it goes, preparing. There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Council Committee, the whole meeting for Tuesday, September 12th. I honor that we are holding this meeting and the traditional lands of our friends and neighbors, the Tla'amin people. First item is adoption of the agenda. Any additions or changes or deletions? Being none. Adopt. In favor? Amendments. So, and I'll also mention just before I go on that Councillor Palm will be joining us electronically if he's able to. Otherwise, he would be away. Number 2, adoption of the minutes. Minutes for the committee of the whole meeting held August 15th. Any comments about that? Motion to adopt. Isaacson. Almeida. Delegations, Mr. Guy Hawkins regarding city finance. Hawkins.
Thank you for agreeing to entertain my delegation. And here, this is the signed copy. So this is called the wedding copy of my petition. And I'm going to leave that with you. I also have a copy. Do you have copies yourself of the petition? Okay. So I'll leave this with
The corporate officer.
this person here. Thank you. So first of all, I don't want to just sort of go through all these whereases. You can easily do that. You probably. But the first one, if we look at the first one, it says Parliament amended the Bank of Canada Act in 1967, allowing the bank to accept interest-bearing deposits from the Bank for International Settlements, other central banks, and international financial institutions. And that's 1967. Now, when you do research on this topic of when the Bank of Canada used to lend money to us at zero interest, and now they charge us interest. When you do some research on that, you'll find that most people quote 1974. And in 1974, the Bank for International Settlements changed what they called the Basel Accords. And when they did that, they wanted to emphasize that the banks should not lend money to governments at zero interest, that the central banks should be lending money to governments at interest, monetize it. And so that's what they began to do in 1974. So when we look at the graph that's on the back here, and you can see where 1970 would be, and you see what happened to our debt. Okay, so that's a very graphic example of paying interest. And when you look at it before, well, we weren't paying interest. And when you look just like around 1940, that red line there that's hardly elevated at all, the Bank of Canada financed Canada's participation in World War II. So participation in World War II is right in there. It's way down here. And this graph, this is 90% of our budget is interest. So, and it didn't just start. Like at what point does a government go, this isn't working? So I'm going to say, because you're local government, and I very much believe in local government, and there's nobody here, I don't think, from the federal government, but you know, it basically anybody in the the federal government looking at this. Hey, and the reason I'm bringing this up in Powell River now is because our sewer project. So it's a very good time. We've got this huge amount of money that we have to borrow. It started out, just my little bit of research, started out 25 million in 2012, and then it went to 61 million. I forget when that was, maybe when they started. And then it went up to 75 million. And now the scuttlebutt is, well, it's 100 million. It'll come in at a little over 100 million. Okay, well, that's fine. $100 million financed over 40 years. The people of Powell River are going to pay $100 million in interest. That's right. $100 million you borrow over 40, you can think like your mortgage on your house. It's exactly the same thing. Mortgage on your house, you pay for your house 2.5 times by the time you pay your mortgage off. Well, we're doing the same thing in Powell River with our sewer plant. We're going to pay the $100 million that it costs to build it and $100 million in interest. And my suggestion isn't like changing rules or laws or legislate, nothing. Don't change anything. Just right here. Now, the Ministry of Finance to return the Bank of Canada to its proper place, financing government debt, as was the situation previous to Canada joining the Bank for International Settlements. That's it. All you have to do is go, oh, okay, we're not going to, okay, we're just going to do this, just like we used to. Oh, we'll look at our records just to remember exactly what we did. That's all we're saying. Just do what you're supposed to do. Now, all this money that we're borrowing, and we talk about inflation, well, that's where a lot of that inflation comes from. You don't read about that in the newspaper, but government borrowing, well, deficits, is one of the biggest drivers of inflation. So if we can get this borrowing down so that we're just paying the money that we need to pay the bills, we're not paying anybody interest because we don't need to. That's what the Bank of Canada is for. Bank of Canada was a commercial enterprise in 1934 when it was set up. It was a central bank that made money. And then in 1936, the federal government, it was private-public partnership. And then in 1936, the federal government bought up all the shares, all the controlling shares. And they said, okay, that's good, now the government controls them. But no, in 1938, the government bought up all the outstanding shares. 100% of the shares in the Bank of Canada are held by the Minister of Finance in our name. The shares, we own them. It's us, it's our bank. We get to say what happens. And when we look at this, I mean, how can we say the bank is acting in Canada's best, Canadians' best interest? It's just not. It's just not doing that. And so we could start right here in Powell River, like, you know, out here on the West Coast and go east and just say, no, this is what we want, and make, you know, first approach the Bank of Canada and say, this is what we want to do. Say that. This is what we want to do. We've got this 100 million, 120 million, whatever it is. This is the sewer thing. It's complete. It's working now. Now we have to pay for it. And we want you to come up with the money, and then we'll pay you back over 40 years with no interest. Approach the Bank of Canada with that. That's my petition. I have a few here if anybody wants one to hand out or anything. I didn't circulate these in town. I didn't go somewhere and try to gather, you know, signatures on this. I mean, a petition is just, as you know, it's just me speaking to you. That's a petition. And my belief is If somebody stole my bicycle, and I went to the police station and I said to the duty sergeant, somebody stole my bicycle. And he or she would say to me, oh, well, you go get 9 of your friends and come on back. No, my bicycle, I don't need a bunch of people. We don't need a bunch of signatures. This is just as it stands, all by itself. It's just like that. And you yourself, like quite sure, can see what's going on. So if you were to ask the people of Powell River, you want to save $100 million? They're probably going to say yes. They're probably going to want you to do this. They're probably going to want you to follow it up. And they're probably going to want to hear back. Like, what did they say? Like, what are they doing? The federal government is like heading to an election in the fall. Who knows? And I'm just going to end by saying the governor of the Bank of Canada was appointed to the managing board of the Bank for International Settlements not October, in 1994. So our governor has been sitting on the board of the Bank for International Settlements, receiving his paycheck from us, receiving his pension from us, working in a for-profit central bank that makes money when we borrow money. That's the situation. Total conflict of interest. And when I tell people about this, some people say, well, that's treason, but I didn't say that. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Before you leave the podium, Council may have some questions for you.
Okay, sure. Yes, certainly.
And before I get to that, I think you may be, to some degree at least, preaching to the choir here.
Ah, good.
Some of us, and I don't think I'm the only one, have studied international finance and economics for some time. So without further ado, does Council have questions after Councillor Dyck?
I don't actually have any questions. I got a couple of comments. First one would be, I agree with you that it's really a federal government initiative because the people who borrow money from the Bank of Canada are the federal government. And they do deal with the relationship with the Bank of Canada and do all of those things. And I thought that when I was reading your petition, it wasn't too strange to me, as Councillor Southcott has said. He said, seen some of this before. As a matter of fact, I just looked up a petition to the House of Commons on the Bank of Canada. And the first thing that came up was a petition by the former leader of the Green Party of Canada, Elizabeth May, asking for basically the same things in a petition she presented on behalf of about 1,200 people in Parliament in 2000. The first comment would be that the people that have control over the Bank of Canada and the people that deal with them are the federal government. Probably a better place to be talking to get somebody active in that would be our local MP, Parliament, Rachel Blaney, because they deal directly with the Bank of Canada and actually control them. I want to talk about your discussion about the borrowing. And we did build a sewage treatment plant, a wastewater treatment plant that cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million. The borrowing for the city's portion of that is already approved and arranged with the Municipal Finance Authority, and that borrowing is in the neighborhood of $33 million, not $100 million. There's details that I wanted to correct, but the Municipal Finance Authority is the lender for cities in the province of British Columbia. That's who we've already negotiated the interest rates borrowing with. So just a little bit of information to add, but what I really want to say is I think the right place to be talking to is the federal government and our local MP.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
So
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins, for sharing your perspectives. And I wanted to say that as an advocacy role that we all play to upper level governments, that there is the FCM, which is the federal version of UBCM, that we can participate in and bring resolutions to and try to get supported by other municipal governments each year. And this kind of sounds like an advocacy role for us to maybe consider at the FCM. We don't tend to send a lot of representatives to that one because it's usually really far away and expensive to get to. But we do tend to have someone there. This last year, Earl attended for our council. And so this seems like maybe an appropriate thing to pursue at an FCM conference for a resolution by municipalities across Canada to advocate for this type of role for the Bank of Canada.
No one else has any other comments. I'll just mention that I'm aware that there has been ongoing interest, very consistent with what you're presenting to us today, and action, including legal action, in the, I believe it's got as far as the Supreme Court of Canada in the past few years with lawyer Galatti's action. So I'm confident that there is a sector of our population who makes it their interest to look at issues like this. They, of course, connect into much larger issues, and that is of the way our entire Western system works. But if questions aren't asked, if things like this aren't challenged, then nothing ever changes. So I appreciate you putting this to us, and I think that if you left us with copies of your petition, that some of us might actually sign it, and I don't think there'd be any harm with even leaving one at over by the entrance there, if anybody who's here would want to sign it for you before the end of this meeting or before you leave. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, thank you. Just really quickly as I'm walking away, yeah, I'm familiar with all of this, been going on for some years, but he took it to court like the government had done something wrong. Like, my idea is if you can just make a 1 degree shift and then carry on like that. So this is the simplest thing. That's how I came up with this. Thank you. Oops.
Okay, on to 3.2. Jonathan Dyck, regarding request to council to downsize lot PID 011158166. I didn't mention this to Mr. Hawkins, Mr. Dyck, but the general allotment for a presentation is 10 minutes. You're probably aware of that. I don't think you.
Just before I start, just wondering if there are speakers in the house. For those of us sitting back there, some of the things being said up here are sometimes hard to hear without the mics being used. I'm not sure. I know it's a new system or something today, but I'm just cognizant that not everything can be heard all the way through the room.
We've just recently had a technology change, and I wonder if staff, could you address that, please? There might be an issue here with the.
There's definitely an issue with these speakers not projecting the way we had hoped. We're going to have our.
These are not working anymore.
They're not working, no. We are going to be in touch with our guy from Census to figure out what we can do about that. When we turn those up, we get the feedback. And so I just turned up the speakers. Can you guys, is it coming through now? Yeah? Can you?
Just barely can hear it.
Just barely coming through, eh? So
actually we had to put my hand on here to feel if it's vibrating.
So is it the same right now? Is it the same? Is it the same right now?
Have Mr. Southcott.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I heard the 3 and I heard the other number.
Is it basically the same though? When I turn it up or down?
Very much so. Very much so.
I guess something to be addressed for a future meeting.
For the moment, I guess suffice it to say we should all speak up so we can all hear each other.
That was good. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name's Jonathan Dyck. I'm a resident of Wildwood. My neighbor Sarah Dent spoke to this meeting a couple of months ago. And so just kind of here with an update and some further information. This is regarding the 19-acre lot in Wildwood. mostly coastal Douglas fir that's slated for development. All right, I guess I can advance that. So the big picture is thinking about the role of council, responsible to all the residents of the city. We want to make sure that development that happens is done at a human and sustainable scale. And we want to try and think about what is the character of the neighborhoods in Powell River, what is the vision, what do we want this to look like? So I'm going to start by addressing NIMBYism, because that comes up a lot, right? People come present to council, I don't want development in my backyard. And we all know that's, that's reality, but there's a bigger picture. And so just to give you a bit of background about myself, I moved here with my family from Langley in the Lower Mainland 6 years ago. And I lived in both Langley City and Langley Township, which are separate municipalities. Langley City is more urban, more densely developed, and also more walkable, right? So developed in a scale where it's not as much dependent on cars, and it's looking at how do we make this community sustainable and walkable. What happened in Langley Township over the last, I've lived there for about 25 years, was it turned from pockets of neighborhoods and lots of farmland into pretty much an entire huge swath of suburban sprawl. And that's because the council just kept saying yes to all the development, and development is good and we want to have it all. We'll try and, there's some farmland in the ALR and we'll try and preserve that. But the development that happened was unsustainable, and it's turned Langley Township into a bit of a mess that most people that live there want to escape. Obviously, we don't want that to happen in Powell River. We see that happening a little bit on the lower coast, and we want to make sure that what happens here, like I said, preserves the character of what makes this place unique and special, but also creates opportunities for housing and for growth, because that's also necessary. So for example, we had a proposal in Wildwood for the Blackberry Commons that came to council and to the residents for consultation. And that was a development I was in favor of. We had lots of debate in Wildwood, lots of discussion, lots of people talking about, is this good or bad? Is it going to ruin Wildwood? Is it going to be positive? And the reason I was in favor of it, and many of my friends and neighbors as well, was because there was an emphasis on providing some affordable housing. There was an emphasis on working with the community to address concerns. There was an emphasis on conservation of green space and working to preserve agricultural land and food security, which we know is vitally important. So that's, I think, the kind of development that most of us hopefully can get on board with. As far as what is the vision for Wildwood, we have an OCP that's up for review next year. And so I'm sure people in the city are thinking about what does this need to look like. But I think we want to think about where do we increase the density and how do we provide the services that can sustain that density in a way that's sustainable and also creates communities that are walkable and livable. So you don't have more and more people having to drive 15 minutes to go to the store, right? Wildwood currently has a small corner store, doesn't have the pub anymore, has very few resources and services available that are within walking distance. So what needs to happen if we want to provide or increase densification? That's sort of the big picture. So the current issue, which is the development proposal that is expected to be submitted, is that there is no requirement for consultation because of this current zoning. And so it would allow the current owner and developer to develop at a very large scale without any consultation or opportunities for input from the community or indeed from council. So the impact of this scale of development and the length of the process were it to be developed to its full potential, which is talked about, 70, 80, 90 units potentially, would be a huge impact on the community. So what are the options, right? What are the opportunities here? Given that the current zoning allows for that, one you know, obviously it has to come to the city's approving officer, who potentially could deny the subdivision if it's deemed not to be in the public interest. Well, is a development at this scale in the public interest? I would suggest that while the development is, this scale of development is not, for a number of reasons. One of them, of course, is conservation. If it happens at this scale, the devastation of these ecosystems, which includes some species at risk, is going to be quite large, and it's going to vastly alter the character of the neighborhood. It's going to impact the, I guess, the people that are living in the neighborhood, obviously, for the next potentially 10 to 15 years while this construction goes on. But also it's thinking about what is that neighborhood going to look like? And is there a plan from the city to provide the services for that scale of development? Obviously, the developer would have to bear the cost of putting some of the services in initially, but then the maintenance of those will fall to the city. Has that been budgeted for? Has that been accounted for? So I would suggest that the scale of this current situation is not necessarily in the public interest. So we also have, thinking about some further tools at our disposal, right? The OCP review isn't scheduled until next year, but we've heard that a subdivision application could be coming up very shortly, so before the OCP is reviewed. So that means the only mechanism that currently could take place that council has a prerogative over is the zoning, given the timeline of this. So we, I believe you received a letter from my neighbor Sarah Dent outlining some of this, also quoting the staff report that was recommended after the last delegation to this committee of the whole. And so one of the items in that staff report was looking at the zoning. It's something that has received a lot of support among Wildwood residents. The initial letter coming to council was endorsed by the Ratepayers Association. The development itself was not something that the majority of our neighbors were in favor of. And a recent Facebook poll of Wildwood residents found 75% in favor of downzoning, so reducing the zoning of this particular lot. Another option would be for a council to fast track the OCP and try and get ahead of this development proposal, but that's kind of risky given the timelines here. And so, I mean, council has a couple of options at their disposal. Are we okay? So one of our suggestions would be that staff, that council direct staff to look at further legal opinion on cases like this, because in the staff report it was highlighted that if council chooses to downzone the lot, there could be a potential legal challenge from the developer, and so is that prudent? Right? Is that fiscally prudent on behalf of council? It looks like, based on some of the legal precedents, developers don't usually win if they challenge council on these kind of issues because it is council's prerogative. However, it probably would be prudent to request further information from staff before proceeding with this, because if a developer chose to take it to court, then of course there would be legal costs associated with that. Now, it's not a given that even if council chose to downzone, the developer would choose to take it to court, given that the likelihood of winning is low, but it is something that would need to be looked at. The other issue here, of course, is what does it need to be downzoned to? So we have RA1, RA2, and AO in Wildwood currently. So if it was downzoned to AO, that would raise the lot size to a half-acre lot, which would drastically reduce the number of new units that would be able to go into that lot, and would kind of maintain the character of what Wildwood looks like today. So that would preserve agricultural potential, which is part of the growing need for food security. It would allow for more conservation of the sensitive ecosystems. And it would also, the other aspect of this is that the owner was approached and was not amenable to sitting down, having some consultation, having some discussion, looking at making some compromises, which means that if anything were to change, it would require action from City Council. That is the main request of this delegation, that if there was a favorable legal opinion, the council would consider downzoning the lot and considering perhaps also an OCP amendment, if that's useful. That could be fast tracked or brought forward even ahead of the official OCP review, because there isn't a lot of time left for this particular proposal. I mean, the bigger picture, of course, is that it's not just about this lot, and it's not just about my backyard. It's about what do we envision for Wildwood? What do we envision for Powell River? What do we want our neighborhoods to look like? Do we want, you know, suburban sprawl across the northern coast here? I think there's places where it's starting to look like that. It doesn't need to. There can be planning. There can be better. There is a lot of amazing planning and vision that happens. But unfortunately, even in Langley Township, they had amazing planners and great OCPs. But that's not what the reality looked like. That's not how the development proceeded. Because in the end, council just approved the developments and didn't really, I would say in most cases, didn't have the guts or the vision to say, we need to take a stand here to make sure that these neighborhoods and this community actually has a plan and follows our vision and doesn't just turn into a big sprawl. We've had some interesting discussions among the Wildwood residents on Facebook recently in terms of, you know, more people is not a problem. We have more people. We need to include more people. We need to build more houses, but how are we going to do it? And so that's what I'd ask council to consider. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions from council?
Thank you. So I am aware that council doesn't have a role at this time in things that are handled by the approving officer. So subdividing is the question that you're having here for lot size and so forth. Beyond subdividing, when you have developments and there's development permits and so forth like that, I wondered if our planner could speak to the avenues for consultation with the community throughout the process, not necessarily just this particular aspect, just so that the public can be aware of when public consultation might happen throughout that process.
Through the chair, makes sense. I will approach the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair. I think Councillor Elliott is referring to maybe what we term discretionary approvals. And discretionary approvals are your rezoning applications and your development variance permits. And those are where there is at least some form of engagement with the community. And obviously then your official community planning process is that largest engagement process. As you move into development permits and building permits and subdivision, those things look to the existing regulatory framework for direction, but there isn't a discretionary component to those. If you meet the guidelines in terms of a development permit, you get your development permit. If you meet the requirements of the BC Building Code, you get your building permit. And subdivision, there's a little nuance to that, but from the approving officer's perspective, if you meet the requirements of the city's bylaws, including the zoning bylaw, the official community plan, and then there's other considerations that the approving officer has at their discretion to look at. I think if I can just maybe encourage this conversation in a different direction, it is really that idea of discretionary approval. And what the delegate is here today to talk about is the power that you have as council as it relates to downzoning. That is your purview. That is your most powerful tool. It is zoning that then drives servicing and drives all the other elements that make up our community. And so while subdivision is a process that looks at minimum parcel size, keep in mind minimum parcel size is built into your zoning bylaw. And so that's where downzoning is truly in effect. The approving officer would look at the zoning bylaw to look at what minimum parcel size is for a zone. And that's really then what drives density. In this case, the idea from the delegate is the larger the lot size, the lower the density, the more it is in keeping with the neighborhood.
Councillor Almeida.
Gal, while you're there, and I could respect and understand that you might not have the answer to this question. Are you aware of any community municipality where a similar situation has come up, where council has maybe had the foresight or thought to downzone a property in advance of a potential development?
To the chair, one of the examples that our city's legal counsel provided in an initial legal opinion when we first expected delegation to arrive was a case around White Rock. Wasn't a subdivision, but it was really an exercise of council's authority to downzone a property, not allowing it to achieve a 13th and 14th story of a building, so again, different scale of development, after a development permit had been issued. They were successful. Just the intent and the reason why that one was shared was really just to give me, but through me to you, an understanding of the power the council has around zoning. Land use is purview, and it is, like I said earlier, one of the most powerful tools you have at your disposal. There's no guarantees. I can, I've had a further conversation with our legal counsel in the tail end of last week, knowing that this was going to be a topic tonight. There isn't an assurance that anybody can provide to you, and so while we may be able to find an even more similar situation, it's still going to be decided by the courts if this is litigated, and the courts always are looking at the very specifics of an application or a situation like this. Mind that there has yet not been an application made. So while I appreciate why the delegate is asking council to direct staff to further legal opinion, and perhaps that's in your interest, and you will do that. I can say from my conversation with our legal counsel last week that there isn't a cookie cutter development that we can look to and say, well, that's what's going to happen here, because every situation is different. Every court is going to look at different things. Fairness is a big piece of the question, and they're going to look at the fact that this property has been zoned to accommodate this type of development for many, many years. That said, I wrote a very clear line from our legal counsel in the last report was, it's been shown time over time that this decision to downzone a property can happen at a time that is inconvenient or even detrimental to a landowner. And case law has been leaning towards deference to council and their power to regulate that or to establish land use.
Thank you. I have some questions for you. Because this is an issue that I've thought about more in general for a long time. I think the last time this kind of issue in principle came up was with a development on the east side of Marine. And no, it's the one up on Manson, where I argued for greater density. And we did pass the rezoning. That was a rezoning application. That rezoning application, that was for greater density, but being as in close proximity to the core services of this community, it made an awful lot of sense to me and to other councillors here that it be even more greatly densified. These are principles that cut against the car culture that we've been living in for the past century. So, and cars represent freedom. Cars represent some very deep principles to us. So it's something that really pushes buttons for our culture, in my view. And that's something that it's increasingly over the years has got through my head as the principal challenge here. So what I've seen is that we need to, the way to get through this, because it's truly a block to sustainability for communities, and that means taxes, and that means maintaining what we have. These are extremely important principles in the responsibility of this table. So I take what Mr. Dyck presents here very seriously when he questions a greenfield development being developed to standards that were agreed to by this community. What was it, 40 or 50 years ago when that zoning was established in OCP, and it hasn't been changed since then. We've seen an awful lot of change since then, and we're faced with real challenges now. So it's sad to me that the developer would not come to the table, and maybe the developer needs a little bit more encouragement to come to the table, because very often when we sit down together, we can come up with some solutions that work for both sides of the table. So with that context, I have some questions. The question that is in my mind is how could we, or would we, and I guess this is partly a question to council, as much as it's a technical question involving engaging legal advice, could we consider a next step like what Mr. Dyck is suggesting? And there seems to be some considerable interest, though it would be more encouraging to me if there was more substantial interest beyond like a Facebook survey, because it's pretty easy to, drum up interest. And I mean, that's about as substantial to me, frankly, as, the contention of this is all generated by NIMBYism, which I don't think is true, because the conservation considerations, speaking from the standpoint of the president of the Malaspina Land Conservancy Association, the only land conservancy association in this community, that's me. I do see that's another angle here that is of interest to me. So the question is, would council have an appetite to take another step in questioning? And the specific question is, have other communities other than White Rock been interested or been successful in facing situations like this? And I would like to make a motion to direct staff to investigate that if this is to council's pleasure. Councillor Dubb.
So where are we at right now? You were asking a question and then you're saying you were making a motion. So.
No, I'm not making a motion yet. I am asking us a question. That is, do we have an appetite to pursue this a little bit further on the basis of the principles that Mr. Dyck and basically I've spoken to here?
A comment to that would be, right now we're replying to a delegation. I don't think there's a motion on the table. I think if we're going to discuss something, we should have a motion in front of us so we know what we're talking about. And thanks for coming and making your presentation. And what the delegation is asking us to do is downzone the property. Property's been zoned basically the same as the rest of Wildwood, and that's not changing. It's been that way since before I came to Bell River, and a long time before that. So what does it do? It provides a development that has to be within the character of the rest of Wildwood, because that's the way the rest of Wildwood was designed. That's exactly the property zoning for all of the rest of Wildwood. The lots on that drawing that surrounds this area are actually some of the smallest ones in Wildwood, because they're about a building size lot. They're not the half acre or 1 acre larger lots. So I believe that if the owner wanted to divide them into larger lots, they wouldn't sit in the way of it. So it's there. It makes it a more walkable neighborhood, a more dense neighborhood. But the things I'm thinking about is other issues. What about urban sprawl? When you back up, look at a little bit bigger map, you'll see the city is surrounded by Tla'amin Nation, treaty settlement lands, forest lands, and regional district lands. Regional district and other groups that they don't want to see the city expanding beyond its boundaries. But what does that mean if we're going to go with our strategic priorities of creating housing and infill and planning decisions that have already been made? That means we're going to have to develop vacant spaces of land that exist right now. You can't do that if you keep telling people they can't densify that property. Those are the issues I have. I think the owner of this property realizes it has a value of 70 to 90 lots. I would think have an interest in seeing that devalue. You have to study that. I still see a larger lot. I don't know, but I think those are all considerations we'd have to take into account. That's my opinion. I don't think we have enough information to make a decision. I'm not on Facebook, by the way. I live in Woodwood, so I haven't participated in any Facebook polls. And towards Councillor Soscott's comments about Facebook polls and their value, I think they have a value, but they're certainly not like an election or some place where you have to register and make sure you notified all of the people that are being involved, whether or not they want to buy into the plan. Those are my thoughts, and I think we have to be very careful before we start downzoning properties so they are less dense currently allowed to be. Goes against a whole number of policies that our council has been trying to work towards.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree with Councillor Doubt in the sense that there isn't a motion on the floor, but I think exploring this issue could lead to a motion, or it might lead to us not making any motion. I don't feel like I've heard enough from other councillors to know where the will is. There's like conflicting values for me here. I think there's something along the lines with what Councillor Doubt was saying, and administrative fairness and predictability, and people being able to plan for the future, an assurance when they buy or move to an area that they know what their neighborhood might look like over the long term. And I realize that some people might not, don't always look up zoning maps or official community plans when they buy something. Okay.
Please, phone is ringing.
Yeah, it's done now. And so I think there's value to an OCP process when big changes might get made, that there is substantial public engagement. And I'm someone who always is thinking, alternatively of future generations, like 50, 75 years from now, what decisions could I have made now that future generations will be thankful for. And I also think about, I had a conversation with Jason actually about what we've made some mistakes in the past and we're dealing with them now. For example, cleaning up landfill sites and things like that. And so 50 years from now, what will we look back on and say, can't believe we thought that was a good idea? And like single detached dwellings are one of those things. They make sense now, but they won't in the future, and they're not covering the costs of servicing to them at this time. And our housing needs assessment doesn't require additional growth in single detached dwellings. And so this is a difficult situation because downzoning doesn't solve that. It reduces the density further, and those lots and the taxes on them would likely pay even less towards the servicing that's needed. I think downzoning, the one thing that it does solve is protecting agricultural potential, but it doesn't, the options on the table right now don't solve any of our problems to any scale. The decisions that are available here, I don't think are great when it comes to future generations. And I when we are dealing with the OCPs of the past, before we look towards the future, I think this shows the power of OCPs and how it's so important for the public to be involved in them, because it impacts decisions of council like this. Yeah, so anyways, I have conflicting values on this discussion, but ultimately I don't think down zoning solves the challenges that I have with this potential development. Yeah, this is a tough one, but I don't think down zoning is the solution. And it's the one, if it's the one we have available, it doesn't actually, not a solution in my mind, I don't think.
Thank you, Chair. Thank our delegate for coming forward, and while I understand the heartfelt request and the what is behind it, the concerns I have are really broad in the sense that as a city, we are needing to move into a future where developers shouldn't be fearful to invest in our community. And if we don't use due process that's fair to all when we make changes or plan ahead, then we are potentially sending the wrong message to everybody. I think as a government, we are responsible for behaving in a very responsible way. And so that is, if we want to address planning in Wildwood and figure out the character and whether we need to protect some trees or put in wildlife corridors or make things sensitive or change the way we look at zoning in that neighborhood, it should be done through an OCP, which is on our schedule to do. Any changes to the OCP do have a robust community engagement. If we're going to do it twice in little pockets of neighborhoods rather than in a larger, more cohesive way, it's going to be more expensive that way. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If we're reacting to each and every development as it comes up, it's going to make developers fearful to invest in our community, and that is not something that I think is good for us all, like as a community. And so I agree, Wildwood is not a great place for high density. I think that we have, through the zoning, indicated we want to protect agricultural values in Wildwood, and I think that's a good thing. I think there are tools that we don't have yet that would better do that rather than lot size. I think through an OCP process, we'll get to a better resolution of how we think the community of Wildwood should look and what we can do to impact, wildlife and making sure that we're taking care of our ecosystems than simply lot size. So I don't think this is the right way to go, because I think we need to be fair to everyone, including landowners, developers, community members, the wildlife. We as a government should do things in an organized way, planned, and through an OCP process that is understandable and not reactionary. It's forward thinking, not reacting. So that's how even though I have compassion for my family that live in Wildwood and people who may be impacted, I don't think stepping outside of an ordinary OCP process is the way to handle this. That's how I feel about this one.
Thank you. I'd just like to.
Can I speak on behalf of Robert Pierce? This issue?
We will hear from everybody first, Bill, and we'll get back to you.
I've got like 3 years.
I'd just like to say that I do not support downsizing, and I think Councillor Elliott have given significant reasons why it has a negative impact on the city.
Okay, just before we hear from you, Bill, I'd like to make a motion, and that is to direct staff to investigate this a little bit further consistent with the first motion requested by in the attachment to this delegation, and that is to direct staff to receive further legal opinion. Okay, this is parenthetically. What motion I'd like to make is to ask staff to investigate this a little further, considering possible legal opinion with the objective of encouraging the developer to come to the table and discuss the possible development with the city and with the community. And if I have a seconder, I'm not going to speak to that much. Councillor Elliott, second. Councillor Elliott.
A question for our planner. In what you've said, it sounds like we've already got the extent of potentially some legal information that we could get. I'm unclear whether or not we would be able to get any further.
Sure, I mean, I'm always amazed when you ask legal counsel for another opinion, they come out with an opinion. So I'm sure that they would do the work, but the conversation I had with them yesterday was there is no cookie cutter solution here. Every single application is going to look a little different. Now, again, I would take your direction and work with that, but does that answer?
So, thank you, Mr. Young. I'm not in favor of this motion. I've outlined some of the reasons why I don't think downzoning is a good idea. And those are not totally connected to whether we have the legal power to inflict that on someone or not. Because that's what we would be doing, inflicting a downzoning of property on a property owner who has a desire to develop it. And the other one is if the legal advice came back and said, you can probably do this, but I'd be in favor of it. And I don't basics from the arguments I laid out earlier. Our sustainability plan, our requirements to limit the urban sprawl that's happening in the regional district and to provide more housing in as efficient and sustainable way as we can. I don't think it makes sense to downzone property. Matter of fact, look at what the provincial government is telling, almost forcing municipalities to do. It's to increase density and to make it easier to subdivision. I'm not in favor of going to seek more legal advice because I don't think I'm in favor of the goal that we would be trying to achieve.
I understand the motion to be to investigate further some legal options or process options for this downzoning. And I know that your intention is to provide leverage to the community to engage the owner in some more conversations about community concerns. So I know that's where your heart is and that's what you're hoping for. I think the motion is a little vague and difficult for staff to implement. So I wouldn't vote in favor of this particular motion. But I do understand your desire to provide incentive for the owner to talk to the community and try to address their concerns. And I wish that we had a better tool for that. I don't think this motion is something.
Opposed? And
But I love your heart.
Yeah.
Councillor Isaacson, I'd just like to give Mr. Bird a chance to address us since he is a representative of the Wildwood ratepayers, if that meets the approval of council by unanimous consent. Sure.
My name is Bill Bird. I'm president of Wildwood Ratepayers, and just to give you a little bit of history of that property, back in the 70s, when the original owner of the property property, sold it to the owner, the present owner now. All ratepayers went to battle with us, city council, make sure that the new owner wanted to put in a 55-unit trailer park. It's called the Tides Trailer Park, and all ratepayers wouldn't allow that low-density housing, unless they gave us at least 2 acres of green space. They did that. And that's the only way they were able to put that trailer park in. Doesn't our with zoning, isn't it AR2 zoning, and doesn't that override any other kind of zoning that we have? So the lots would be same size as the original lots that are on that property, the perimeter lots. If they were that size, we would be happy with that. When they want to make them smaller than that, let's make
The zoning is RA1. There is no RA2. I think it may have been R2 that the information was referred to. RA1, the minimum lot size for RA1 is approximately the same size as R1. So it's the same density as Westview, for example, for the most part. If I'm not wrong.
And I thought Waller was exempt from that. Waller was exempt from that. We were zoned agricultural, rural agricultural.
It is, but in definition, the size is what's at question here, Mr. Bird, and that the RA1 size is about the same size as R1. Is that not true, Mr. Gow?
It's exactly the same size, 730 square meters. Lots around the perimeter roughly are about 1,000 square meters.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks. I just want to give you a little bit of history of how Wildwood ratepayers fought and got green space for Wildwood so that they could put the trailer park. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say that I appreciated Councillor, excuse me. Tricky now with this microphone maybe picking up everything. It might be hard for folks to hear online. I appreciate Councillor Elliott's remark in that I also appreciate your sentiment. Like the will is about trying to draw goodwill out of the owner and engage neighbors. And I like that is the end that I would like to see. I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. The goal of downzoning, I think, for me is not what's at heart, but there are other concerns that could be addressed through conversations with the property owner related to like potentially wildlife corridors or other you know lot sizes or other things that might address some of the similar concerns. And so I don't have another motion to offer, and unfortunately I don't think we're at a point where we have other levers. So I appreciate that will, and I would like to see that too, but I don't see other levers that we have at our disposal to encourage that goodwill.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat a lot of what's already been said. I concur with most everything and understand where you're coming from, Councillor Southcott. I would also kind of agree that if there was a way to engage with the developer prior to them submitting an application to discuss their plans, that might be the best opportunity if that developer is willing to have those conversations. Like you said, most positive resolutions can be figured out upon a healthy discussion, and hopefully the developer feels the same way.
Thank you. Other discussion. I'm going to move on to correspondence email received August 26 from Hawkins regarding Dr.
An email from staff just before this meeting as a response to Hawkins' letter. Blackberry Festival and city's involvement into it. I wonder if somebody from staff has that email and they could share that with the public here. I think this is the appropriate time to do it. It's on the agenda now. I know staff has provided a response to the writer, but I think it would be a good idea to put that response on the public record because it explains a great deal about how the interaction between BC Transit, the local transit service, the Blackberry Festival, and the city works. Everybody's trying to do a good thing for everybody else and have a great festival and make it open to everybody, but there are mechanics in that. So I wonder if staff has that.
That's a great idea. If council approves by unanimous consent, maybe we could hear from our corporate officer, please.
Certainly. I could read out the email.
That's what I'm asking for, please.
So as a follow-up to the author, Ms. Hawkins, I did check with the transportation department regarding the options to improve accessibility. And so while Blackberry Fest is a city-supported event, it is not a city-run event. And the city only supported as requested by the event organizers, which in this case was the provision of the shuttle service, mainly helping with street closures. A handy dart would have been the best option, as the author mentioned, but because service only runs until 5 p.m., the organizers of Blackberry would have had to apply with BC Transit for special event shuttle use after hours with pre-booking required, as all handy dart users have to be registered. So a lot of pre-planning on their part would have been required. From a staff perspective, first and foremost, we are looking at policy changes that will help ensure accessibility is a consideration in all aspects of daily business, which would include event planning. And we would also be happy to explore opportunities for future events with event organizers along with BC Transit to ensure inclusivity.
Thank you. Any other comments from the council?
Just like to make a motion to receive the letter and thank the writer for ever lasting interest in accessibility and willingness to improve accessibility in the city and the region.
Because we've accepted the agenda, we have by default accepted this letter as well. So Elliot?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm curious about whether we could put this concept to a planning process that might look at how we as a city coordinate and work with event organizers to look after sort of the public interests, such as accessibilities and things like that, things that individual event organizers might not think of, but the city might standardize around coordinating and helping event organizers and make it part of our standard practice. And maybe that belongs with our newly formed accessibility committee, or I don't know, staff has suggestions, but my thoughts are this is a very worthy idea. If we as a city standardize how we helped events get organized in our city by paying attention and asking questions about things like accessibility and did you know you could do this or apply for that or these kinds of things, we might have events across our city organized by all kinds of people where we facilitate ensuring accessibility concerns are addressed at the planning stage. So that's my question, staff.
Through the chair, yep, so a couple of pieces there. So the accessibility committee is in the process of forming the plan, which should be done by her. So approved by the committee, and then that will be the city's accessibility plan. A big piece of that plan is policy. So starting with policy to ensure that, as I mentioned in the email, to have it as a standard practice across all departments. So regardless of what you're doing, there's an accessibility component that staff is considering, whether it's working with community partners or hiring practices or facilities or, you know, any of the things we deal with. So that's where the accessibility committee really comes into play, because they have that lived experience of what those gaps are. So informing staff what can be done. And so, yeah, the first step there will be policy. So tell staff, you have to follow policy. That's exactly what I was asking about.
Just I've worked with Dave and Mark at the seniors and seeing what they've done at Creek, and I'm sure the council will know accessibility. So I just suggest to staff that they may use them as useful resource going forward.
And Dave is vice chair of the accessibility committee, so that voice is carried through on there as well. And speaking to Councillor Elliott's comment around some standardization so that public event planners are aware of opportunities available to them, I think that also extends beyond accessibility to things like zero waste. So Blackberry Festival, it's hard to find a place to recycle or throw away anything. I know a lot of, I know the Let's Talk Trash team has things available for organizers to help reduce waste at events. And so there are other practices that could also be embedded in policy to help community groups and even city organized events, making sure that we're checking all the boxes to make sure that we're covering a lot of bases when it comes to acting in the best interest of all of our residents.
Just 2 cents to go with our corporate officers. Future plan that will be there. I attended Blackberry Fest for the first time, used the transit for the first time, and it was great. The one kind of surprise, I guess, as a mostly able-bodied person, was that the bus actually dropped us off at the bottom of Duncan and Marine, which is, I don't know, 30-degree incline. Is where the bus stopped, not on a flat-ish area to get off at, and which was fine for myself and my family, but I imagine anyone that would be a little bit ably challenged, regardless of wheelchair or not, would have had a wheelchair would have not been able to get off on that spot. So just something to add in the plan for future buses. I actually spoke to a former coordinator of Blackberry Fest today who was actually surprised that was the drop-off spot because it was a different location in previous years as well. So maybe we can pass that on.
On to item 5, reports for information community engagement.
Sure thing. It's been a few months since we did community engagement reports. I lost track of everything, but I'm just going to focus on the more recent things, which has just been the summer. So I had a chance to take part a little bit of the Cathette Studio Art Tour back at the end of August. And Blackberry Fest was a great time. About a month ago, Kindred Rebuild actually did a couple of information sessions on just great discussions of how to create more awareness of their facility, but even just awareness of repurposing and reusing materials in our community. So that was unfortunately not well-attended session, but it was a good conversation, and had a chance to partake in some of the music in the park nights that the Parks and Rec Department put on. So that in conjunction with the night market and stuff as well. So quiet summer overall, but ready to get rolling now.
Thank you. Was focused on reading our agenda packages and not preparing for community engagement updates. So maybe just a couple of things that I have from memory. Obviously, Blackberry Fest, always fun to see, to come down the hill kind of by the Legion and see just all the people, lots of fun, lots of great food. I also attended one of the Kindred Rebuild open houses, and there were some great questions, had some good conversations, and even explored opportunities for this, how Kindred might support some of the city's strategic priorities, depending on where our strategic plan lands. Pride Week was super busy, attended part of Drag Story Time, and it was great to see kids learning. There was sign language songs and stories about dinosaurs, and it was a well-attended session, a couple of night markets, and then attended a webinar on retrofit assist. So there's I feel like, maybe I talked about this at a previous one, but retrofit assist exists currently in Squamish, Whistler, and Rossland. The idea being that people who own older homes and would like to do some retrofitting to improve energy efficiency and their energy related costs could kind of get this concierge service to find a contractor to make improvements and to apply for all the grants that are available to them or any financing that's available, and just help them do the updates they want to do in a way that improve energy efficiency, and also connect them with an energy advisor to make sure that the needs of the house that need to be addressed first are being addressed. So for example, if a house is really drafty, it doesn't make sense to install a heat pump because the air turnover is so high, and it's more important to clog the leaks first. So anyways, I learned some things coming out of that I might bring forward to a future meeting, because I know the city has done previous work on potential feasibility of something like that here, because so many of our houses are older and we can implement new building requirements, but most people are dealing with old houses, and that's where a lot of the energy costs and climate impacts are. So that's the last one that I'll share, the top of mind.
It has been a long time since we did one of these community engagement reports, and I'm just going to go through memory of the fun things that we did last summer, like the first day in school. So, you know, I want to take note of the pride flag raising that we did outside of City Hall. Elliot and I both here, and there was a large turnout and more different pride flags on the grass in front of the City Hall than I've seen before. They seem to have new colors every year. It was a good event, and glad Pride Week went well here. I want to talk about something that council did with our staff that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think, at council, but I appreciated very much. It was a full one-day tour on a BC Transit bus that took us around all of the city's facilities, the airport, the water pumping stations, both up the hill and on Wildwood, the sewer treatment plant, another good tour of that plant. Basically, all of the city facilities that we looked at, and it took staff and council all day to do that tour. So it was an eye opener for people, myself included, who thought we knew what the city did and where we did it. Very useful tour. Blackberry Festival, wow, to see virtually everybody in town and a few people from town who came back to be part of Blackberry Festival, eat some blackberry cheesecake, and just walk up and down the street and talk to everybody. I haven't seen people for a year. Go to Blackberry Festival, and you know, I haven't seen another place that has a festival like that, based on a humble berry. That, you know, I talked to people who are staying in the Wellington Beach campground and telling me what a great campground that was. And they said there were actually people there who had bought blackberries for like $6 for a little tray. They realized that you could actually pick blackberries on Marine Avenue during the Blackberry Festival if you wanted to. But you know, what better symbol for our community than the blackberry? It's available to everyone, and we all love them, and they're great. One thing that a lot of people didn't tell me they also went to was the bathtub races out at Gibson's Beach. One of our parks and recreation properties, Gibson's Beach, and it is a great place to watch bathtub races because it's kind of a Coliseum-like atmosphere there on the grass in front of the water, and watch bathtub races. And I took about an hour and a half, 2 hours. They're pretty exciting. A couple of thrills and spills as people turned their bathtubs upside down. Everybody was happily rescued. There was some noise made, but I think for the small amount, I'd say there's probably somewhere between 50 and 80 people that were out there watching the bathtub races. But maybe it'll be more popular as time goes on. Some of the other things, I did go to Wellington Beach for a few events. I went to the Sunshine Music Festival too, and I'm going to fly everybody from town there as well. including some Councillor Suscott in the first aid tent where I only expect to see him. But the Sunshine Music Festival I want to talk about is an example that people see that they don't see anywhere else, is that it is truly a zero waste event. They have staffed with volunteers, many of them from the city. You have a dishwashing tent. You have a recycling area. Not hard to find a place to recycle anything, and you have to recycle. And as a matter of fact, there's no food containers to recycle because there's a dishwasher tent. All the utensils and the plates go back. Volunteers wash them and distribute them around again. And I think it's an amazing example of what the city could do if we tried a bit harder to do the proper recycling and reducing waste. Great example. And it's the people who do it. And that was what I was taking from all of these things I went through the summer. It's not a huge organization that does these. It's not a business. It's a group of volunteers from the community who are going out there trying to make life better for everybody around. And it's a great gift that all the volunteers give the community. That's what I've been doing and how I've been.
Yes, while I was busy preparing for these meetings this week and also UBCM, which is coming up next week for us, which does require a lot of preparation. There are somewhere around 200 resolutions that we need to be vaguely at least familiar with, including 4 of them from our city, going to UBCM on pertinent issues that we then engage provincial officials, both ministers and staff, on to represent the needs and concerns for our city. So I'm looking forward to that. That's not exactly in the past, but I also, but I thought it's good for our community to know. It's certainly a highlight of our year, huge opportunity for us to engage with people who make a big difference to what we're doing here. Those people being in Victoria to a large degree. I did attend a few of the events that have been mentioned. I also didn't make a list of everything that I've done, except, and I just wanted to mention too, I was delighted to see the zero waste operation down at the Sunshine Music Fest. I have to say I was disappointed not to see it at our July 1st event down at Willingdon. There's another great opportunity for exactly the same kind of thing to happen. I was going to write a note to somebody, but I didn't these days. Just one more thing that I want to mention, and that is I attended a seminar sponsored by the Columbia Institute featuring BC Hydro, a Columbia Institute consultant, and an energy consultant, speaking to the zero carbon step code, which is an initiative of the provincial government through provincial government BC building code amendments that is coming and is being adopted now by about a dozen smaller and larger communities in British Columbia. So this was an educational seminar along the same lines as what Councillor Isaacson spoke to. Most recently, the NIMO voted to include an advanced time frame for introduction of their zero carbon step code, and we very soon will have a CAO straight from the NIMO. I think probably had something to do with that planning. And I also watched NANIMO's meeting where they had a very hearty discussion and debate about the pros and cons of advancing changes like that within community. It definitely challenges us, but I believe those of us who embrace change are ahead of the game. So that's just me. And that's what I wish to report on. Maybe we'll finish with you, Mayor, and go to Councillor Elliot.
So me next then, okay,
Yes.
you're the bringing up the.
Finish with the thing here.
Thank you, Chair. So like others, I attended the amazing Blackberry Fest, which was really well attended. It was so nice to see everybody out. I did attend the flag raising at Pride Week, as Councillor Dyck mentioned. And I was really impressed with the tour put up of the city facilities. I learned a lot. I wanted to thank Tom Day for having that idea and organizing that for us. Learning about the city facilities that we have throughout the city was, I think, something we should have, that should have happened quite, it should happen for all councillors when they come on board so that they know, what it is our city encompasses. Like, we have so much going on. There's airports and seaplane bases and, harbors. It's just, the city's got lots going on, and it was really great to tour all those facilities. I also managed to attend a Green Shores 1 course on Sanitary Island that talks about erosion control and tries to teach best practices for how to prevent erosion control and the kinds of things that people do to try to prevent erosion control that actually make it worse. So learning about that was, I spent a day on Savory and it was sunny, but I also learned a lot. I had the opportunity as one of the city representatives on the regional district to attend the RD board on the road at Lasqueti Island. So we had a boat trip down to Lasqueti Island for the day, and we got to see humpback whales both directions, on the way down and the way back. So that was pretty exciting. The Cathet region just is so rich in experiences, including humpback whales and the variety of islands and people that we have here. Our community action team that we normally have was canceled during the month of August, so I'm looking forward to the one coming up next week because we haven't touched base with them for a little while. I attended a number of the Thursday markets that happen down along Willingdon, and summer's over, I guess, so we'll be looking, won't get to see any of those till next summer again, but I thought moving that market on the pier over to the Willingdon area was a very successful thing. I thought it was wonderful to walk through the market and then go down to the beach and have my kid play and eat the salted caramel organic ice cream. So hooray for Powell River and that market. I attended on one of those Thursday market days, the Overdose Awareness Day down on Willingdon Beach. We put up purple ribbons, and many people who had losses would tie a purple ribbon on the memorial tree, and we had a group morning session, and I attended that with others and mourned the people that I have lost. We recently had a lot of back to school activities with all of our children. So my 2 young kids at home, we had to organize all of their back to school activities. Managed to do that. Coming up tomorrow is the Committee on the City Owned Properties. So if public wants to know about that, that's happening tomorrow. We are all attending UBCM next week, which is a big part of where we do our advocacy work and put our hand up to vote for resolutions along with other communities so that the province knows which resolutions most municipalities support or do not support. It's a great part of democracy at work. I wanted public to be aware that we have our financial planning public open house coming up at the Cedar Room in the Rec Complex on September 28th. People should come and participate. September 30th, which is the last day of our month, is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And people at school and elsewhere will likely be wearing their orange shirts. There'll be probably a walk that people can participate in, and I plan to do so. So that's my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Saturday, I attended the 50th opening game of the Villa Stock. Quite impressed to see all of the senior people from Victoria out talking about the success of the villas, and it was nice to see a couple of the original players, first team there. So it was very good to see that type of activity in the city that's been going on for so long. And particularly, I like talking with some of the younger players that talk about the impact that that experience has had on them. I just think it's great, any opportunity the city can find to provide opportunities for young people with athletics or any type of volunteerism. Everybody else, I did attend Blackberry Fest, and using my Little League expertise, I managed to dunk the Remax Realtor 3 times. Credit to council for that training. Lots of interest. I met with both Quentin Smith, Civic Coastal, and the executive team from Harbor Air over opportunities to increase transportation options in and out of Fall River. So opportunities I've talked with staff about following up on that invitation. Met with representatives of the transgender community in the city. Would like to see if there's any way that the city can support any type of activity or program that might reduce the impact that they are seeing in the city. So again, discuss this with their CAO. Had a tour of the Meridian cannabis facility. Very pleased to see the jobs that they have created and the outstanding job they've done taking an operation that was shut down and never anything to one that's very viable, creating jobs and producing economic opportunities for the city. Don't mention the Sunshine Music Festival, an amazing example. I spent a day at Port Alberni because a number of people have pointed out to me that you want to look at a community that has really demonstrated innovation in solving housing and promoting economic development. I was very impressed. For the last couple of years, they have initiated housing projects, some with First Nations, others with developers, and everything from, I'm sure some of you will have seen the article that was done in their tiny homes to affordable housing to apartments with a range of housing options. I really appreciated the mayor arranging for the CAO councillor to tour me around the facility. I found it interesting that the CAO summarized Port Alberni's success in this way. And council just decided that they were going to solve housing. And they've initiated a significant number of partnerships. And he said what staff was left to do was to catch up running council's decisions to go ahead and move things ahead. So I think that's a good example when we look at all of the city land that we have here. That we really should just bite the bullet, look at what Port Alberni has done, and we could be sitting here a year from now with significant developments underway. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. on to 6.1 bylaw updates to distinguish modular homes from mobile homes. Sanitary is on the back.
Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor, and Council. Thank you for having me this afternoon. The purpose of this report is to consider bylaw updates to our official community plan, zoning bylaw, and the building bylaw to better distinguish modular housing from mobile homes. The reason being that those three bylaws right now have confusing language and lump all manufactured homes together under the terminology of modular homes, and this by accident, I think, discourages people from building modular homes. So what we would like to do instead is prepare bylaws that distinguish mobile homes from modular homes so that we can encourage more people to bring manufactured housing into Powell River, specifically modular homes. So the Manufactured Homes Act deals with mobile homes, or sometimes they're called sectional homes. So it might be a 1 or 2 unit factory built housing that's put together in Powell River. Those are located in mobile home parks. And the Manufactured Homes Act also deals with modular homes, which is a different kind of factory built housing that might have 1, 2, 3, or 4 sections that are transported in those sections to the site and then built on site on a regular foundation. Modular homes can be considered the same as our regular site-built homes that we see around town if the homeowner follows a couple of steps, but basically they need to put it on a foundation that any other home would be on, and then file some paperwork with the province to say that it's a permanent home on that location. Something that's not considered a manufactured home under the Manufactured Homes Act is recreational vehicles. Those are instead regulated by the Motor Vehicle Act. So I just wanted to say that we're just focusing on Manufactured Homes Act, mobile sectional homes, and modular homes. So here's some pictures of different kinds of manufactured homes. Appendix A to the staff report had a couple of those pictures, but I think the gist of showing these pictures is that there's a variety of housing that can be built in factories. Then we brought and installed on site that looks very similar to what you would see as a site-built home. So some of these pictures are homes that would go into a mobile home park. But the intent here is just to show that these are all BC manufacturers of manufactured homes. There's a lot of innovation going on in the field, and that changing our bylaws could help encourage more of that here in Powell River. I don't necessarily want to get into the weeds of the differences between mobile homes and manufactured homes. There are details in the staff report, but the gist of it is that there's standards that factories need to operate to manufacture homes, and then there's also different standards to which the homes need to be constructed to so that they meet BC building code requirements. And our bylaw would hope to make it more clear which ones are mobile home standards, which ones are modular home standards, and therefore, again, same point, encourage more modular homes in Powell River. The proposed changes would be to where there's mention of modular housing in the 3 bylaws, staff believe the intent was actually to talk about mobile homes and to restrict mobile homes to mobile home sites. So that's an error that we would like to correct so that we're not accidentally restricting modular houses to mobile home locations. And then also make it clear that people could use modular homes as a principal or an accessory dwelling. And be more clear that travel trailers are regulated under the Motor Vehicle Act and are not considered dwelling units under provincial legislation, just so that everyone's clear with that. And the changes to the building bylaw will be similar as well. So just that all 3 bylaws are using the same language and singing from the same song sheets and are being clear that way. I'll happily answer any questions, but just to reiterate that the purpose of this report is to seek direction to change the official community plan, the zoning bylaw, and the building bylaw to distinguish mobile homes from modular homes. And the recommendation would be that staff go out and do some public engagement on the changes to meet our requirements for doing an official community plan amendments that would do early and ongoing engagement. And that engagement would look like sending a letter to nomination to the school district and to the regional district that we're considering amending the official community plan, and then hosting an open house to get input on the proposed changes. Thank you.
Chair, just one question. There's two paragraphs to your recommendations here. Is it two separate recommendations I'm trying to read through, or is it one joint recommendation just broken down into two paragraphs?
Through the chair, my intent was there was one mega recommendation.
I can, yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify. So I think it was the first time you specified precisely that you could use a modular home or a carriage house. Construct the modular home, appropriate size and height.
Your presentation was really clear. I didn't really have any questions. So just kind of summing up the main difference between a mobile home and a modular home is the type of foundation it's on. Is that correct?
Through the chair, there's a couple of differences. And one of them is that mobile homes are in a metal chassis, and that modular homes might not be. So there's a couple of differences. There's also a different standard to which they're constructed, so different kinds of insulation values, for example. So they're not interchangeable.
Thank you.
I will go ahead and make that recommendation. I recommend that staff be directed to prepare draft amendments to the City of Powell River Sustainable Official Community Plan Bylaw 2370-2014, City of Powell River Zoning Bylaw 2100-2006, and City of Powell River Building Bylaw 2141-2007 to distinguish between modular homes and mobile sectional homes to facilitate modular home construction. That Council, with respect to consideration of amending City of Powell River Sustainable Official Community Plan Bylaw 2370-2014 to distinguish between modular homes and mobile sectional homes to facilitate modular home construction, has considered appropriate consultation opportunities with persons, organizations, and authorities pursuant to Section 475 of the Local Government Act, direct staff to provide a public information meeting to provide opportunity for consultation with persons, organizations, or authorities who may be affected, and direct staff to mail notifications to Cathett Regional District, Lamination, and School District 47.
Sure. We need to refer this.
You're just seeking direction at this time, so staff will be bringing that back for a council decision with all this.
Yes, through the chair, a question I forgot. Would this fit under some of the initiatives that you put forward under the Housing Accelerator Fund proposal? Like this?
Through the chair, that's a great question. The Housing Accelerator Fund application didn't require us to get to that level of detail, but it could be something. Yeah, it could be eligible.
And I just, I support this. I feel like the public engagement, I mean, obviously this isn't a foregone conclusion. We do need to go through a proper process, but I feel like public engagement could also be an educational opportunity for people to know the types of suppliers that exist in the province, and giving people just the idea that it is possible. So it could kind of fit two different things. And I also wanted to mention to council, I don't know if you've seen, there's an event happening right after Premier Eby's remarks at the end of UBCM on Friday afternoon to talk about off-site housing constructions, under which modular homes are one of these, being that the premise is we don't have enough people in the province to build the housing that we require on site. And so there's an interest by many parties to solve the affordability crisis, climate crisis, the economic crisis, to build more off-site housing and then assemble them in place. And this is a great example of that, and supports that movement because it does hit a number of really great marks. So I'm glad to see this coming if we vote in favor of it.
I'm in favor of the motion. I'm really happy it's come forward, and, you know, congratulate staff for bringing this forward. We do have a housing crisis. We don't always have the labor in place to do everything here in Powell River. I think the option of bringing in modular homes and putting them in as permanent residents on foundations is an excellent way to build some houses, and that option is definitely needed in our community. Thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, I'll just mention that I do appreciate Councillor Isaacson's suggestion, having done a fair bit of research previously in previous years into modular. It's interesting how many businesses there are providing modular home structures within British Columbia, even not that far from us, Gibsons and Squamish. That I did investigate, and good quality. Thank you very much. On to 6.2, permissive tax exemptions for 2024.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is to obtain direction for the 2024 permissive tax exemptions bylaws, which are due to BC assessment to be fully adopted by October 31st. And of course, it's always the year preceding when the bylaw would be in place. So I'm seeking direction for that. Now, just for some quick background, permissive tax exemptions are exemptions to the assessment value of a property that council can permit to certain properties as described under section 224 of the community charter. So for example, the charter would outline that this could only apply to nonprofit organizations, for example. As well, permissive tax exemptions for eliminate the value of the assessment for that particular property. So that then shifts the tax burden to the rest of the tax base. So this isn't an increase in expenses for the city, it's just a shift in how the taxes are paid. Now, council also has Council Policy 261, Community Partnerships, which outlines further criteria on how to assess the permissive tax exemption applications. So this policy provides staff with some guidance when we receive the applications on what to put forward. So I'll start with just a quick summary. This year we received 107 applications. So that's 107 properties, and that's from 48 organizations. So of course, many organizations hold multiple properties. The total request was $560,000 in municipal taxes. Council has set up a policy of a max of $400,000 in permissive tax exemption. So we are oversubscribed. Of course, the policy is a framework. It's not a rigid tool. It's to guide the analysis of all the applications. And so staff have assessed all the applications based on the policy criteria. And essentially I would say that all of the applicants meet the criteria, the main criteria, other than the financial need criteria. So there's a requirement to demonstrate financial need in the policy, and it's a little vague. So you know, it's left up to interpretation. So when something's left up to interpretation, staff trying to be as objective as possible read into the possible interpretation of this criteria and have come to two possible interpretations. The first interpretation of the financial criteria is that Financial need applies to organizations who can't afford to sustainably operate into the future without the exception. And if we didn't give them the exemption, a huge portion of their funding would go to paying taxes and to the detriment of the users of that group. Also, it would say an organization that has financial need, they don't have a substantial single source of funding. So if you are an organization that has one major funder each year and it's reliable and it's consistent and it makes up 90% of your funding, one lens is that doesn't meet that financial need, the intent of that financial need criteria. And then of course, the final thought as far as financial need goes is what percent is this ask? So what percent of the permissive tax exemption that this organization is requesting is of their total funding from that single source of funding? So if the permissive tax exemption request is less than 1% of their total funding, then is that financial need? And so option one would looked at all of the applications under this lens, and we came to the conclusion that not everyone would meet this criteria. In fact, I think about 5 organizations would not meet this criteria, but then that results in 97% exemption for the remainder. So that's option one. Option two interprets financial need on a more broad sense, where the applicant has filled out the application, has expressed in the application that they do meet all the criteria, including the financial need. They are a nonprofit, and so they would meet the financial need criteria in a broad sense. Under option two, that results in 70% exemption to all of the applicants. And so these are the two options depending on the spirit of the financial need criterion and how council would like to see that analyzed and applied. So that's the background for the two options. This summary sheet here, it's a summary of one of the appendix in the report, which gives much more detail. But essentially, like we said before, we'll be exempting just shy of $400,000 in either option. It's not exactly 400,000 because BC assessment needs a round percent figure, so that's an administrative reason for that weird number. But what the option one versus option two is saying is, do we give a higher exemption to less organizations or a lower exemption to everyone? And that really comes down to how the financial need criteria is intended to be applied. I'll open it to the floor for any questions at this point, and welcome any questions, comments, or feedback.
Are you at liberty to give us an example, a couple of the 5 that would not meet the criteria for the first approach?
Yes, through the chair. I don't have all the numbers exactly in my brain, but I do recall one organization requested about $8,000 in exemptions, and that was about 0.02 or 0.05% of their total revenue from one funding source. A few of the organizations were about 98 to 99% funded by one single source every year. They don't apply for that funding. They don't compete for that funding. It's, they probably have reporting requirements to maintain the funding, but it's reliable in the sense that it's assumed that funding will be delivered to them. Maybe the amount might vary year to year, but 98% funded by one entity. Sometimes it's the provincial government or a combination of the provincial and federal government. They'll set up a nonprofit and fund it that way.
So you have the list here in Appendix B of the summary. Were there any applicants who did not meet the criteria that you deemed like should not receive any?
Through the chair, it really did come down to the financial need criteria. I will say there is a little bit of gray area where the policy does talk about not to be used for residential purposes. And there were some applications that would be excluded under option one that could be argued to be for residential purposes, sometimes for people with disabilities, mind you, and that sort of thing. But it's difficult because what if the nature of the organization is to provide housing to people? Does that exclude them? So that one is a little bit tough to interpret as well. But because these particular organizations were all excluded under option 1, it was, yeah, that, other than that, I would say they all met the criteria.
Yeah, no exclusion under like the community impact category or like community benefit criteria.
I would say no. I mean, those ones are very broad, that everyone could access the service is one of the main ones there. And, you know, when you look at all of them, everyone could technically access these services. Some people, you know, if it's for someone with a disability, you could argue that maybe if you don't have a disability, you can't access that service, but I don't think that's the spirit of it. So in that regard, they all met that broader criteria.
And I have a couple questions, but I'll start with 2 and then spread it around. So potentially there may be 5 who are more impacted than others, or perhaps all of them would be more impacted than others, depending on whether we go with option 1 or 2. I'm wondering, as a part of this process, are they notified of the decision-making process and the fact that we're having this conversation tonight, and could speak to, their interests?
We, through the chair, we do rely on the organizations to follow the public notice of the meetings. Because there's so many applicants, it would be a high bar to reach out to individually and invite them to all the meetings, because if we miss one, we might feel we didn't include everybody. So we rely on that. We also do publish the proposed bylaws twice after they're proposed. But I will say the recommendation for option 1 is that letters go to the organizations in addition to the advertisement, so that there is a specific point of connection there and an explanation of why. So that was added in the recommendation intentionally, because I think if option 1 were selected, that would be an appropriate level of communication.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I'm curious about some things we've talked about a little bit before around maybe an eligibility of a property, not so much the agency. And the reason I bring that up is some properties are being run by nonprofits, but they're being used to deliver government services by contract. And it's not in our criteria, but I'd like to see it there in the future. And maybe you could speak to this a little bit and how that might impact this a bit. If properties that were being used to deliver government services from the provincial government, for example, were not eligible to be in the application in the first place, because provincial governments should be covering taxes when they're delivering services. Would some of these applications be considerably smaller, or do you have any sense of that?
Through the chair, I understand the question to be that if a nonprofit organization funded by the province was considered that they do meet the criteria because they're a nonprofit, and then the way the policy is written, if you're a nonprofit who helps everybody and doesn't exclude anyone, and you demonstrate financial need, you're included. So there are some of those organizations that do meet the criteria. It just comes down to financial need. I would say that would be the will of council there on how to apply financial need, because it's broad. That's kind of up to council to determine, but no, they are not excluded under the community charter because they are a nonprofit. It's not how something is funded, it's if they're a nonprofit or not. So
is there room for us to determine? I guess what I'm saying is if a nonprofit is delivering a government service through a contract, they get to tell the government what their expenses are and ask for those expenses to be covered. And their land taxes really ought to be covered. If the government was directly delivering those services and it was their property here in our city, they would be paying their taxes on that property. And so that kind of use doesn't seem to fit our intention for permissive tax exemptions. And so I'd like our policy to sort of say the provincial government can't just hire a nonprofit to deliver their government services and be eligible for permissive tax exemptions. And I might be a little bit of a broken record, but that's where I'd like to go with this. And I think this picture would look a little different if we could implement it. And I don't know if there's room to do that. Maybe we're legally not allowed to, but I think we should be able to.
The chair, absolutely. You could apply that in the criteria. Like, for example, Service Canada or the courts pay us, they call it PILTs, payment in lieu of taxes. So the provincial government pays us taxes when they have a building and own property in the municipality. And I do understand that if it's a nonprofit with a contract for the province, they submit their expenses and the province pays them. So it is likely that this would just be added as an expense and the province would pay it, but I can't, guarantee it. That's just my understanding. You could put that in the policy. There'd be nothing offside about that. Thank you.
I'm just very supportive of having a policy where non-for-profit is providing services for a provincial government agency, you do not get a tax exemption.
That's what I was saying too.
Couple questions. Thank you, Chair. Does not option one kind of already cover what Councillor Elliott was talking about? Like,
Not specifically.
but are there, I don't know the list of who contributes to what organization in town, but are there smaller organizations that are mostly provincially funded? Because I'm seeing the ones that I'm aware of that aren't getting anything in option one, which kind of meets your criteria, just doesn't specifically state it. But I think that's what the CFO was trying to get at, right? They're 90% funded by some sort of higher government.
Yes, through the chair, option one does exclude all of the, I believe, fully government funded nonprofits. I would say Nature Trust of BC is an interesting one. That's not a nonprofit set up by the government. It's a little bit of a unique one, so I'd put an asterisk beside that one. It's unique in the way it's set up as a trust. But other than that, from my quick scan, I believe that the financial need criteria did filter out those organizations.
Through the chair, just a comment. So my intention was not to, sorry, I just, in relation to what he was saying and this comment, my intention was not to filter out an organization that was delivering government services, because they might also be delivering other services that are not a government contract on separate properties. My intention was that they only put the properties in their application that meet the intent of our policy, which is not delivering government services. And so some organizations have, 31 properties. Many of those properties are delivering government services through contract and shouldn't meet the eligibility of this application. They should only be including properties that meet our criteria, which is not those properties. And so I think it's hard for us to look at this just through the organization itself and affordability, because some activities are funded by fundraising and in the community and are being delivered by a service like a nonprofit and truly do deserve those funds. But not, they're also doing this other thing over here that is a completely different activity. Anyway. Yeah.
Just had one other one. It's PTE related, but not specifically to the CFO's request, but CFO and I have had a conversation offline in the past about my awareness that other municipalities have PTE exemption processes that cover a couple of years. They're multi-years. I work with an organization in Burnaby, and the city of Burnaby does PTEs for a 3-year term. And you've often stated the volume of time that your department takes up. And I wonder, while we're putting this direction in, does it make sense to include some conversation of that? I was hoping you might bring it up yourself, so I'm going to bring it up for you.
Yes, no, through the chair, I was anticipating that question, so thank you. I would have brought it up at this point, but because we're having a separate conversation into the future on the policy itself. I wanted to bring it up at that point. I didn't think council would have an appetite this year to commit to the maximum 5 years, but going into the future, when we look at our policy, I think it would be wise to embed the 3 to 5 year maximum amount to decrease the administrative burden. It would be a great time saving.
I've got a question that I'm going to make. Okay. First off, we had, a large delegation come from Sea Cadets and Army Cadets and Air Cadets asking us to do something about their permissive tax exemption. And they don't show up here on this list as Sea Cadets, Army Cadets, or Air Cadets. Would they be the Timberlane Barracks sponsor committee?
Chair, yes.
I want everybody to know they're on the list, and that's what we're talking about. And I'm going to make the motion that's in the package, and then seconder I'll talk to it. Propose option number 1, taxes only.
That's to go to council.
Oh, this one's to council now.
Chair, no, this is for direction. So we could take your direction and then we'll return to council with the bylaws.
This might be like the previous one, which I was corrected on when I thought it. Sorry about that. I can understand you. So the motion is to choose option 1 of the 2 that are given. If there's a seconder, I'll talk to them. Thank you. So right now, there's been a lot of discussion about the policy. But what we're doing here right now is we're responding to applications that have come in. We've had applications from all these organizations for permissive tax exemptions, and it goes beyond the $400, $400,000 cap on exemptions. And we've got 2 options. So we have basically either option 1 or option 2 to choose from. And there is a deadline for making that choice. I think option 1 is the fairest one. I think it meets things that I've heard people concerned about. It has a larger impact on larger organizations, I think, frankly, when you look at it, but we have to make some decisions about how we're going to use a limited number. I would have liked it if we had been able to have a year-long consultation about our policy, but we haven't been able to do that in the last year. I look forward to actually talking about the policy and being able to have consultation on the ongoing policy in some way in the future. This motion is about a time-limited decision that we have to make. There's a timeline that has to be prepared and has to be finalized in the next few months. And the policy, however, can wait, and we can do consultation, we can provide community input and let all of the people who might want to apply for who they think should be eligible. The committee come in, hear all their opinions about what kind of groups should be entitled to. We're making a time-limited decision here, either option number 1 or option number 2. I think probably option number 1 is better for the community overall. And if you look at the numbers, you can see a large number of community organizations are benefiting.
So I understand, Councillor Dyck, made the motion to option 1.
Yeah.
And the mayor seconded.
For point of order, I think staff needs to count the motion to actually be read in full.
This is the motion is, because I've been reading the information. That council directs staff to prepare permissive tax exemption bylaws in accordance with option 1 outlined in Appendix B, and that letters be sent to those organizations who do not meet the permissive tax exemption.
Discussion?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Dyck's motion in the sense that we had applications this year based on current policy, but I really look forward to a robust conversation about future policy because I have lots of opinions about this in a way that could ensure that we are funding community in a way that advances our priorities and that meet the needs and the crises that we're facing currently in our community. So I look forward to that discussion. But given, as Councillor Doubt shared, this time-sensitive requirement, I support option 1 in the sense that I believe it meets the best interests of the community more broadly.
Question, all in favor? Unanimous. Six B. Council for Sewer 2024 sewer parcel tax rates.
This report, the purpose of this report is to obtain direction for the sewer parcel tax rates. For quick background, parcel taxes are taxes that are charged on each parcel of property based on the number of feet, we call frontage, and we establish a rate and we apply it to the number of feet to establish the tax. Now, the city has 2 parcel taxes, both for sewer. The first is for the collection process of sewer, and the next is for the treatment. The reason we have these sewer parcel taxes established is that the sewer infrastructure is 1/3 roughly of our total capital costs. So it's a prudent way to ensure we have enough funding available for this critical and very expensive capital, from a capital perspective, service. So the 2 bylaws for collection and treatment have the rates established in them. And I will say that there are rates established for 2024, but I prefer to bring up the discussion around rates not in the year that they end, so that we have time to discuss overall strategy. So that's why this is being brought forward. Also, the consolidated wastewater treatment plant is the largest city's project in history, and so it's a good time to start discussing the parcel taxes. So that's kind of the background of what parcel taxes are. And we have assessed the parcel tax rates that are established for 2024 and have determined that if we do not change them, that the city will have to collect $500,000 for sewer capital costs from property taxes. And it's not wrong, it's a policy choice to use a combination of parcel taxes and property taxes for sewer capital costs. So I'll start with option 1 is maintaining that status quo and applying a 2% increase each year to 2027 to establish a new rate schedule. The other option, of course, people wonder what is the other option. Well, many municipalities structure their parcel taxes to fully cover the capital cost of that service. And so if the city wanted to do that, we would need to increase the parcel taxes by 18% in 2024 to the rates shown in the report and on the screen. And what that would do is fully collect our parcel taxes, fully collect the capital cost for sewer. And then we wouldn't be collecting that from taxes. So we would have more revenue from parcel taxes, less revenue from property taxes. So option 1 and option 2 do not change the total amount of money the city will collect. The city will collect about $3 million in both of these options. But there is, of course, a really important implication of these options on how we collect these funds. So that's the major point to get across in this process of looking at setting parcel tax rates is the implication on the taxpayer. So from a very high level, option 1 collects parcel taxes and property taxes for sewer capital costs. And you'll see in the report that I demonstrate the cost under option 1 for the 25th percentile resident class property, as well as 50th and 75th. And I do that for the business class as well, because I need to demonstrate here the differences between values in assessments and classes. So you'll see under option 1, for example, for a 25th percentile residential home valued at about $386,000, option 1, they'll pay $469 for their contribution to the capital costs for sewer. Under option 2, they'll pay $517, because in option 2, they're not paying partly through property taxes. So that's a 10% increase to that property. in their contribution to sewer capital costs. On the flip side, a business in the 75th percentile of about 630,000, that's their assessment, under option 1, they'll pay more. They'll pay $663 to sewer capital costs versus option 2, they'll pay $517. So they'll see a decrease to their contribution of sewer capital costs. And this is because, quite simply, as we move up in higher valued homes, as we move up in higher tax rates, and we shift to option 2 that doesn't collect anything from property taxes for this, it shifts. And so, you know, property tax and parcel taxes is more advantageous for people who have lower value homes and are in lower tax, a lower tax rate class. So again, it's not, neither option is wrong or right. It's just, this would be the implication. And so it's not as though, for example, the first one, there's a 10% increase to the tax bill. So I've put more information in the report. In actual fact, the 25th percentile would see a 1.8% increase to their total tax bill. And in the other extreme, a 75th percentile in the business class would see a 1.3% decrease. So when we're looking at the total tax bill, these are the amounts. Now, it's not my position to say if these are big or small. It's just the facts, the numbers that they are, and the impacts that would be. So that kind of covers on how we collect the same amount of money, but it impacts everyone differently. There are other considerations I've noted in the report. I'll summarize them in that there's, you know, often the conception that lower value properties are lower the person's ability to pay. And that is sometimes true. Your assessed value is sometimes a proxy for your ability to pay. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a family home with, you know, marginalized people in the home versus a couple in an apartment with a lower value home. So it is a proxy, but it does have some correlation to one's ability to pay. It's important to note that property taxes and parcel taxes are both deferrable. So whichever route you take, if someone is deferring their taxes, they'll be able to do that for parcel taxes. Permissive tax exemptions do not apply to parcel taxes, however, but depending on the value of the assessed property for the permissive tax exemption application and the class they're in, they may see an increase or a decrease. It really depends, so I can't conclude that this would be advantageous or disadvantageous for them. And I will add that from an asset management perspective, generally best practice, you know, CFOs are generally low risk. So they might, you know, really push to have parcel taxes and user fees covering the cost of that service simply because tax cuts can happen and this protects the service and the funding for the service today and into the future. But that's best practice is not necessarily where every municipality is at. And so it's just a consideration. So with that, I think I've covered all the points. I will also add one small item here, and you'll see it in the recommendation that there's a recommendation to move Schedule B to the sewer user fee bylaw. Schedule B outlines the rates that we charge companies who come and dump the sewer they've collected, usually from the regional district, into our treatment plant, and then we treat it. And that is a better structure for user fees. So these companies don't have properties or parcels of properties, and we set the rate based on the flow and the amount of waste that they give us to treat. So it's, in essence, that would be a user fee that we would want to apply. And so the recommendation here is also we move that Schedule B to the user fee because that's what it's defined as, and that's how it's classified in our revenue structure as well. So that's a small aside. With that, I will open the floor to questions.
I'll just jump right in. So it looks like one way or another, there's a balance. We're either going to collect the money as a rate or a fee, or we're going to collect it as property taxes. Basically, the taxpayers are going to pay one way or the other. And I kind of like option 1 because it doesn't change the tax prediction for 2024, moves increases further away. Gives people satisfactory or stable rates for 2024, and it doesn't give that sudden increase. And I see the part of it that suggests that there is an impact on lower value properties, lower price properties. It would be a little higher than it would on other ones. It gives them a little more time to react. But you know, it means that $500,000 that isn't going to be collected by sewer parcel tax rates is going to be part of the tax bill that people receive on their regular. So that's all going to work into the mix as we move towards March and try to figure out what the bottom dollar is people are being asked to pay. I think I'm right about that stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Good Chair, that's correct. Your understanding.
Thank you, Chair. So we look at residential class 1. What I'd like to understand a little bit better is multifamily buildings that may have like very small frontages or stratas or what have you. How do the various options impact our higher density multifamily units?
Through the Chair, they are the same tax rate as residential. And so it would be a very similar situation. I think there would be valued a little bit lower because of they're smaller and they share the land more. So multifamily would be closer to the 25th percentile impact for residential or less. So they're going to be part of the group that would receive an increase similar to the 25th percentile for residential.
So the fee that they pay though through the parcel taxes will be based on frontages that are fairly small. They're not necessarily based on the value of the home like you have your 20. So I'm suggesting there's an opposite.
It could be, it might be a little bit of
I think that it's not reflected in this chart at all.
Yeah, you're right. The frontage, and I'll stand correct on that. We would need to do a full separate analysis for multifamily because of the frontage amount.
It's completely different than everything else.
Yeah, they might be, I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to collect the same amount. Where they would fall, it's still going to depend on their assessed value as compared to the frontage. And so I think within it, if we were to pull all the properties, we're going to see some that could go up and some that could go down, depending on, so I think it's all going to be within the realm of under 2% impact as far as the total property tax impact. But you're right, within that class, that one would be unique and within that one type would have both an increase.
I think they may be better off under option 2. So that's just my sense of it with I don't know for sure though.
Yeah, it is hard to say. Thanks.
I'm not seeing a bunch of hands up for more comments. I'm going to move the first option, Schedule B, that staff be directed to prepare amendments to the sewer collector system bylaw 2616-2020 and sewer treatment and disposal bylaw 2615-2020 in accordance with option 1 as outlined below, and move Schedule B in the sewer collector system bylaw 2616-2020 and the sewer system user rates bylaw 2614-2020 and update the parcel tax rates as followed in this, as written in the agenda. I can speak to it. I generally, I default to option 1 for 2 reasons. One, Councillor Dowd shared, related to shocks to the tax system is one, and also 2, I generally prefer taxes to go up with higher value homes, option 1 maintains that. It's the way that we currently mostly collect, and so I support option 1 for those reasons.
I also agree with Councillor Dowd's remarks. I do support this option 1 recommendation. This reminds me of the discussion that we had some years ago about the flat tax. Essentially, it's a very similar situation. Although that one was greater impact, especially back the principle still exists, and we are a caring and generous Scott. And those of us who can endure it will endure more pain for the good of our community, and that's why I support this recommendation. Any other comments? None?
I just want to, throw you through a little bit. So I recognize that affordable housing is linked to, affordable living is linked to our taxes to a certain extent. And the 25th percentile is where our young people will be trying to get into homes and may be struggling to pay for those. So I like the option that is most friendly to that. At the same time, I do think we need to kind of move a little bit in the long run towards covering our costs the way they're intended. And I do see that what ends up is businesses or higher taxed places to some extent are then subsidizing the cost of sewer for some other units. And then density of housing plays a big part. So lot sizes and frontages, and so that all plays a part. So to some extent, folks who are living on large lots will naturally end up paying more if we went with option 2. So that would be kind of an incentive to have smaller frontage lots, a little bit more affordable living in that way. So it's not entirely true that one or the other is best for affordable lifestyles, right? So there's pros and cons on all of it. I do think we should have less shock at first, so option 1, and then as time goes on, we move toward whatever the end goal is so that each property is paying for their appropriate costs over time. So that's kind of what I was thinking.
To 6.4 sanitary sewer user fee rates.
So the purpose of this report, very similar to the last one we went over, is to obtain direction regarding the sewer user rates as outlined in the sewer user bylaw. So sewer user fees are charged to fund the operation of the sewer process, not the capital, but the operation. And since the rate is in its final year, 2024 rate is the last year it's established, we wanted to bring this forward to council to give ample time to consider what we want to do in the future. So similar to parcel taxes, the sewer user fees are funded, the sewer user costs are funded through user fees and property taxes. Currently, and I actually have, it's 56% of the total costs are funded by the sewer user fees. And it flipped in my report, so I apologize. And so the question then is, do we go with option 1, which is status quo, and keep the 2024 rates as they are and apply a 2% increase? Or do we increase them in this scenario 80% to obtain 100% coverage of our sewer operating costs through sewer user fees? So option 1 versus option 2, and option 1 being status quo. And again, just similar to the last presentation, is that it's the same impact. Those who, option 2 will be more expensive for the lower valued homes, in summary. And it's a similar percent. It's 1.8% increase for the 25th percentile residential, and it's a 2.8% decrease for 75th percentile of the business class. Just a note on user fees in general, I think it is interesting that when you survey the user fees and taxes on a representative home across BC, we see a trend where Powell River does have lower user fees and higher property taxes than some other more similar communities. I'm not saying we want to do a full comparison because we could never get the data on that. It's just, it's in the report. It's interesting to see that the total cost is actually, we're right in the middle of Comox and Courtney, but when you drill down to that total cost, our user fees are about $600 and Comox they're almost $1,200. And you can see that offset in taxes. So it's not a conclusion, it's an observation that perhaps that's just the policy and approach that we have. And again, it's not wrong in any way. Some other considerations though here are user fees aren't deferrable. So this shift would increase the cost to the lower assessed homes and they would not be able to defer those. So that's, I think, an important consideration in this area. Again, I talked about pulling that Schedule B into this bylaw, so that's part of the recommendation. But it is interesting here, I'll say that option 1 and option 2 establish an increase for Schedule B. They both apply the same increase, and that's because we're trying to recoup the cost of servicing the companies that take waste from, say, the RD or from outhouses and dump in the city. And so in speaking with the Director of Infrastructure, our new treatment plant required specialized equipment just for this purpose. And then of course it requires staff time and chemicals. So the increase proposed in this bylaw for Schedule B is just simply to recover the costs of that are associated with that particular part of our business. So option 1 is status quo, but include Schedule B and up the rates. And option 2 is up the rates by 80% and include Schedule B and increase those rates as well. I'll turn it over for questions. I think I covered all the main points on that.
I was giving a little pause for questions and seeing none, I was just going to make a motion. Similar to the last time around, someone on agenda item. I will move that staff be directed to prepare amendments to the sanitary system user rates bylaw 2614/2020 in accordance with option 1, detailed in Appendix B of the 2024 sanitary sewer system user fee rates report dated September 12th, 2020.
Questions, and I noticed that Mr. Galinsky left the chambers early on. I suspect that was probably due to challenges in if he is on the line. Okay.
He is not on the line. I did mention to him that he'll be able to pick up the sound by watching it online. He'll probably have a better opportunity to record. And also the meeting will be on the City of Powell River's website, or not website, but the YouTube channel as well. So it'll be there for over you.
Stand by just in case he does join in. Any questions from the gallery? Mr. Hassett. Seeing no questions from the gallery. Last check. No emails, no questions. Need to give them any more time or move on to next motion. Motion number 10, Councillor.
I move that following adjournment of this regular meeting, council move into a closed meeting to discuss matters covered by the community charter under section 91E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. J, information that is prohibited or information that if it were presented in a document would be prohibited from disclosure under section 21 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages and that in the view of the council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. And the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under a provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
So as I said in the discussion. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Isaacson, Councillor Almeida, Favor?